Restore her to operation! Run her on the main line! How many times have you heard that? It's kind of a running joke, and it's understandable why. But I don't think we should come down too hard on people who are, well, passionate about that. If we're being fair here, any kind of community, especially when it comes to preservation, needs passionate individuals who genuinely care about this stuff. And I think it's totally understandable that plenty of people would be interested in seeing a lot of these old machines run again, especially steam locomotives. So if you're one of the kind of people that wants to see every single one of these steam engines put back into operation, thrown back on the rails, doing what they should be doing, then hold on to that passion, I say. But maybe channel it in a more realistic way. The reason I say this is because, okay, look, I'm pretty passionate about preservation, and I love to see old steam engines run again, or really any old locomotive. But I'm also a realist, and as such, I'm gonna be real with you. It is not possible to get every single preserved steam locomotive up and running and on the main line. Doing so is a tremendously difficult thing to do. I don't want you to lose your passion. I fully support you channeling it into preserving as much as we possibly can for the future in museums or even running in some cases. But the notion of every single one of them doing so is a little outlandish. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but let's just start at the beginning. First of all, to be clear, we're talking about locomotives, and a lot of them are fairly large. This differs quite a bit from, say, a car. Restoring an old, dated car is generally not as difficult as a locomotive, particularly a steam locomotive. Because there are different kinds of locomotives, and they vary in terms of how difficult they are to put back into operation, and we'll get to that. But the thing about a car is that even an older one, generally you can get some of the parts you might need with relative ease, because we still drive cars. But we don't use steam locomotives anymore, and getting a lot of components is a heck of a lot more difficult. Even planes are sometimes a lot easier in this regard. I would say that the only vehicle more difficult to preserve, let alone get running again, than a locomotive is a ship. Because ships are a Christmas nightmare. You have any idea how difficult it is to preserve a ship? You can't just stick the USS Texas in a garage somewhere. That doesn't happen. Plus, there's a lot more limited space because you can only put them on a coast somewhere. And then you have to constantly, consistently, repeatedly, forever maintain them because salt water hates metal. Ships are a pain in the butt. But locomotives are a bit easier than that, because even just for static display, you could stick them inside a building where they're safe. But we're talking about getting one running again. Alright, well, what kind of locomotive are we dealing with here? Well, that varies quite a bit. I would say, generally speaking, the easiest to get up and running again would be a diesel, but even that varies, because it depends on the age of the diesel and how many components are actually left. Because the problem with a lot of diesels especially is that many of their particular components are stripped and gutted towards the end of their lives to help other diesels keep rolling. As such, by the end of things, when they're sent for the scrapyard, or even donated, they're missing a lot of pieces. Sometimes their whole engine is gone. And in that situation, what is one to do? Well, it depends on how old the diesel is and what kind of engine it originally had. Trying to get a hold of an original would be tremendously difficult if it's old. If it's a newer one, it might not be as hard, but even then it's going to be pretty expensive. There is also the option of simply re-engineering the diesel, though some would resist that because you want to make it, well, original. And granted, other pieces surrounding the engine issue might be a bit more easy to come by. Diesels are generally a lot easier to work with and restore purely because we still use them in America, and it's a lot easier to get a hold of some of the components. This is followed by electric locomotives, which I consider the second most difficult, but that depends on what country you're in. Some other countries might have an easier time of this because they've used more electric locomotives. Here in America, though, it's not as common. Amtrak does have some electrified lines, a few isolated freight routes do, and like 2 heritage lines have the electric option. Of course, there's also the New York subway and such things. But the point is, restoring an electric locomotive to operation is gonna be difficult depending on a lot of factors. A more recent one, utilized by Amtrak, might not be that hard, This is not that old. But what if you wanted to, say, restore a GG1 to operation? Oh no. Yeah, restoring a GG1 would be a tremendous and nearly impossible undertaking. And there's a good reason why no one's ever tried it, at least to my knowledge. They use a lot of very old electrical components, things you absolutely cannot find as easily, but the biggest problem is the PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls. These are man-made organic chemicals, and they are very, 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 very toxic. Just so outrageously, horrifically toxic. They are, in fact, banned in the modern day for a very good reason. And preserved GG1s are just full of these, and you would have to get all of those out. This likely would not be easy, and it would be incredibly dangerous. You would need specialized equipment, specialized personnel. It would be a friggin' nightmare. So you can kind of understand why a GG1 isn't running in the modern day. And to be fair, it probably could be done, I would say so, but no one's willing to sink the tremendous amount of cost and risk into doing so. But let's be real. When it comes to the meme, most people want to see heritage steam locomotives running again. All of them, forever, eternally. Run all the big boys, all of them, now. Fill the lines with big chungus. This isn't feasible, you guys. Because restoring a heritage steam locomotive is not just a matter of putting it in a shed and getting right to work. I mean, yeah, I guess with a lot of nerve you could, but also you need a lot of money and assistance. This isn't like a one-person job over here, generally. I mean, I suppose it depends on the size of the locomotive we're talking about here. A very small one might not be that difficult. But even getting into average size for steam locomotives, yeah, you're gonna need a lot of help. And you probably don't have money to pay them, so you're looking for volunteers. A lot of volunteers. And a lot of donations from a lot of other people. And that's a lot of money, and you gotta spend it all. And restoring a steam locomotive isn't easy, because most of the components you might need really, just aren't available anymore. As such, they have to be custom fabricated. And that on its own is very expensive. Even smaller components can run you into the thousands of dollars, or God help you if it's the boiler. I would say average here, when it comes to restoring a steam locomotive, we're looking at spending at least $1 million. Give or take. It'll vary quite a bit, depending on the condition and the size of the locomotive. It might be less, it's possible, but it also might be more. And most places, museums especially, don't have $1 million to spend on every single one of their steam locomotives. But let's say they did. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, every single museum suddenly got just so much money, just an infinite amount of money. They could do whatever they wanted with it, and they decide, yeah, we're gonna hire a whole bunch of personnel, and we're gonna restore every one of our locomotives to operation because we're just made of crazy now. Alright, fine, great, wonderful. Where are you gonna get the personnel? Oh, you didn't think about that. Interesting. Yeah, that's the other issue. You need qualified people to work on these, or at least people that somewhat know what they're doing. And that's, hard to come by in the modern day, particularly with steam locomotives. One of the benefits to working on a diesel and restoring one of them is that, even if it's an older diesel, someone who has a degree in engineering probably understands how a diesel engine works and can figure out how to work on one, even an older model. But steam is not the same thing as that, because most people have no friggin' idea how steam works anymore. They just don't teach it. As such, most people have to learn on the fly, or apprentice under someone who does know. There's very few qualified individuals who can work on a steam locomotive in the modern day. But you have an infinite amount of money, so you're gonna find them, and you're gonna train them. You have infinite money. Alright, great. You've done it. You've restored all the locomotives to operation. Beautiful. Wonderful. Where are you gonna run them? Oh, you didn't think about that either. Yeah, I bet you didn't. See, that's the other issue. And a few locomotives are starting to run into this. A lot of lines just, aren't as keen on letting steam locomotives operate, or if they are, there's a lot more restrictions placed upon them, particularly in the insurance department. A lot of these excursions require the owners of the steam locomotives to have insurance on them, and do you have any idea how much the insurance rate is for a steam locomotive in the modern day? Well, a lot of the Class 1s that even allow other people to operate steam require at minimum a $500 million liability insurance policy. That would be roughly $1,500,000 a year just for the liability insurance. Never mind all the fuel costs and everything else associated with. It is physically impossible to make an excursion profitable in the modern day. So anything like this is going to be a money pit, unless of course the railway owns their own locomotives, because a lot of people say, well, Union Pacific does it. They have the big boy. They have 844. Why can't everyone do that? Well, see, Union Pacific, for one thing, owns those locomotives. They can do what they want. And for two, they are a billion-dollar Class 1 railway. They have the money to spend on this kind of stuff. They can do whatever. Most of these restoration projects are either carried out by museums who generally rely on donations to stay afloat, or individual groups that come together and do something awesome, who also generally rely on donations to stay afloat. This is not something that every one of them is capable of doing, and as such, even if you restore one of these steam locomotives, even if you manage to do it, running it in America is a tremendously difficult thing to do. But you have an infinite amount of money, so you're going to build your own line. Where? You need city ordinance for that. You need to pay the fees. The government demands their pound of flesh. There's a lot of things here to consider before you even begin to do something like this. It is not as simple as grabbing a wrench, going to town, and bam! Now you have an S2 in your backyard. Magical. Are there plenty of steam locomotives that I want to restore to operation? Yes, absolutely. But I also am well aware of how difficult it's going to be, because people have come to me and said, hey, you want to restore Madam Queen? Well, why don't you start a GoFundMe? And yeah, that'd be a really great idea if I didn't realize the long-standing implications of absorbing that kind of responsibility. If I were to get a hold of that locomotive now, I would need a place to put her, I would need proper accreditation and licenses, I would need a lot of volunteers. Money is one thing, but there's a whole other list of things that you have to consider before you do something like this. Even restoring a locomotive for static display can be very difficult because, well, you gotta make sure you have a place for them. I just talked about how the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum desperately needs more space for their locomotives. They are not the only ones dealing with that problem. Plenty of locomotives have to sit outside. They're preserved, yeah, but they're under wear and tear. How would you feel if you spent years restoring a locomotive for static display, only for them to be just stuck outside, and in like 2 or 3 years they're rusting into oblivion? Yeah, that's great. Money well spent. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying you have to understand all these other factors, all these other things to think about. Either way, the end result here is that the vast majority of preserved locomotives simply won't ever run again. It's just not financially or logistically feasible to make that happen. In a perfect world, yeah, I'd be down for it, but I know it's not possible. I will restore Madam Queen one day. Mark my words! But to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, the static display really isn't that bad. It's certainly better than being scrapped. And if you've ever been to a really good railroad museum, you know the displays they can afford to put indoors are really well taken care of. The engines in there look beautiful, and they'll be there for generations to come for people to see and enjoy and appreciate them. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be pushing to restore things to operation when it's feasible, but what I am saying is that being on static display is a good thing too. That's an engine that's safe, that doesn't have to worry about going to the scrapyard, doesn't have to worry about disappearing forever. And that's a heck of a better ending than the vast majority of locomotives, historically speaking. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders, some dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord Off 444, Isaac for 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redline, Ennis Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Zielinski, Jared Brussel, JBL Explorers, Tommy Orsini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Terevel, Hayden DeGrow, No, Kurt Forkham, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Morris Hillman Productions, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Western Colorado History, Ryan Weofer, Duraushi, Your Mom Liked It, Windy City Rails, A-Person723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer78, Shimasu, Murder Drone Stall, Eric Hutton, AET Museum, NJ1969, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness and Image World of Fun!